we can overthink and over negativize things that happen in our career, and really they may not be nearly as horrible as you think they are. And I love that you had a career coach. You know, you can just have a rant buddy. You can have a friend outside of the organization, does not work for your organization, who can help you just to realize, hey, yeah, that happened. That felt really bad. And that was a bad moment for you. In time, you're going to see that was a speed bump. And so I do think that is super valuable.
Welcome to Leadership Disrupted. I'm Dan Rust, and today we have with us a very special guest. Joyce Andrasz is a high-energy, dynamic, thoughtful corporate training professional. She's worked with Fortune 500 organizations and with smaller, more entrepreneurial businesses. As a facilitator, she delivers a broad range of professional leadership development programs. She delivers those globally, and she quickly builds rapport and credibility when she focuses on topics like coaching and talent development, from emerging leaders to senior executives, on emotional intelligence, communication styles, presentation skills, change management and resilience, performance and development planning, influencing others. Basically everything. Joyce does everything exceptionally well. And that's one of the reasons I'm thrilled to have her with us today. I expect this to be a very wide-ranging and interesting conversation. So, Joyce, first of all, welcome to the Leadership Disrupted podcast. It is very good to see you. Joyce and I, we've worked together on numerous projects. And so when I say nice things, those are not nice things just because I read your LinkedIn profile this morning. They're nice things because I've experienced them. And so, but before we really dive in, is there anything that I'm missing in terms of like filling in the blanks regarding who is Joyce? Anything that comes to mind?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you read my LinkedIn leadership profile this morning, because I just wrote it this morning. So it's
excellent.
very fresh.
Okay.
So there's not a whole lot missing. I think the biggest thing missing is that I transitioned from corporate America, private industry, to being self-employed about 7 or 8 years ago. And that has really had a huge impact on me and my ability to be more independent, and my caring a little bit less about what people think of me, and sort of being a little more authentic. So I would just add that to the pile.
Well, I do think one of the things that makes you as effective as you are is because you have lived in that world of corporate America. I have friends and colleagues who have, how do I say this? They've been gurus all their lives. Apparently in their 20s, they felt the mission of, being a trainer, speaker, consultant. And so for 10, 20, 30 years, they've been on the outside, which is fine. I mean, in order to survive, they have to be really good. So they're really excellent at what they do. But there is a certain depth that comes with someone who has worked in that world, who understands the nuances of that real world work life. And I know when you facilitate programs, you bring that experience to whatever the topic might be. And so I'm excited, and I don't want to go too deep too fast, but I'm excited to talk about how you've seen what we might call the optimal leadership model, how you've seen it evolve even over the last few years. Clearly something is shifting because the employees are shifting. Employees are changing. Their attention spans are lower. They're more impatient. They want to grow faster. They don't want to do necessarily the gritty work necessary to grow faster. They want development. They expect more from their leaders, while their leaders are still focused on having to deliver results. And so any thoughts on just the overall landscape shift that you're seeing in today's workplace, and specifically how that might impact, what the ideal leadership model might be?
Yeah. So just to comment on the background, I feel like for me, it was essential to have had in-house corporate or company experience because I have zero technical knowledge on like any subject. So for me, having the ability to have worked in manufacturing and distribution, warehousing, and inside of corporate headquarters, and with sales, and with all kinds of different finance and IT, and folks in logistics and inventory. All of that to me has been really helpful just to understand their world, because I don't know anything about what those people actually do. So that's really been critical for me as a facilitator. And now, so your question is about the ideal leadership model. And I don't even know what those three words strung together mean. So tell me what it is right now. Dan, what is the leadership model right now so that I can react to what perhaps could be ideal or not?
Yeah, okay, it's pretty fancy terminology, and I would say
Use the small words.
what I think there's a gap between what employees want from their leaders and what leaders think they need to be in order to be effective. And I think classically in the last 10, 20, 30 years, there is a leadership model that is meaning the leader is at the top of a pyramid. The leader is the essentially the king is the person in charge, the person who directs. Generally, the unspoken expectation is that the leader is the most competent, is the smartest. The leader earned that position by being the best in a lot of ways, and the leader is where we go for judgment and insight. And leaders, to a certain degree, we keep them in a bubble. We keep them distant, and we hope that they will at times deign to spend time with us. And that sort of distant leadership model, that leader high on the mountain, that leader as the lone ranger who swoops in and either saves the day or makes the correction or solves the problem and then swoops away again and comes back. And I think that, and I may be talking a bit extreme, but that the essence of that model is very different than the leader as a coach or the leader as a trusted guide. And so I guess that's what I'm referring to. Like, what are you seeing in the world in terms of that shift that's occurring?
All right. So first of all, this is my business partner, Maisie, and she wanted to be part of the process. And so she'll come in and out.
Always welcome.
Maisie, she's the best. She's second in command, or is she in charge? I can't remember. I think about, and so sort of the leader that you described is sort of the most senior sort of leader in the house. And I think I'm just going to redirect because I don't know the answer to that one. Yeah. So I'm going to redirect to say those who lead others sort of at a, at whatever level, but oftentimes as, a senior director, even VP and so on. I feel like one of the things that we're constantly talking about when I facilitate is what's the best way for you to lead another person? Like, how do you make sure tasks are assigned? How do you make sure things stay on track? How do you make sure they understand the strategy that's inside of your head? How, all of that. And what has really come to my mind is that the answer is it depends, right? Which is always the answer to any question I ask so if you're ever in a class of mine and I ask a question, just simply chat in or raise your hand and say it depends, because that's the answer. But I feel, Dan, like in the last century, in the middle of last century, the answer to leadership was you got to be, you have to be directive, right? And it was sort of this militaristic hierarchical thing where everybody had to come out and like, you got to get in there and you tell them what to do and you make sure it gets done and you ride them. And in those days, right, we were very directive as leaders because that's how the general was, or the staff sergeant, anybody was extremely directive. And that's because people were more seen as parts of a machine, right? People weren't necessarily seen as whole humans. They were seen as parts of this important machine that would move the car down the assembly line, or whatever the thing was, whatever the objective was. And then I feel like somewhere in the 70s or the 80s, the pendulum kind of swung, and it was like, you don't tell people what to do. Like, don't micromanage, right? That was like the rallying cry.
Mhm.
Don't micromanage. That's a terrible leader. You should never tell people what to do. You should get them to, plot like all this stuff. And so the first leader was the my way or the highway leader. And the second leader was like the do not micromanage leader. But what happens is either one of those could be completely wrong for the person. And so what I think, as leaders, what leaders need to start thinking about is, who is this person that I'm leading, and what do they really need from me? So if they know what they're doing, if they have years of experience, if they're the top of their whatever, they're the guru, then yeah, absolutely, don't be directive. In fact, you may not even be telling them what the plan is, what the strategy is. You may have a conversation with them. P.S. That's 5 or 10 conversations, not one, where you come up with the strategy, you come up with the plan by asking a question. What are our pain points? What's one thing we could do that would change, the way things are going around here for the better, right? And then they do it, right? That's the highest level. But for other folks on the team, they may not have that level of ability at all. Right. And so you may need to be extremely directive. Here's what we need to do. But then don't forget, here's why we need to do it. Right. Here's how it helps the business, or it helps your team, or how it helps you. Right. So here's what needs to be done. Maybe even as directive as, here's how to do it. In fact, I'm going to show you how to do it once or twice until you get it. So I think what's happened is people have been stuck between these. You gotta get in there and just tell them what to do, or don't be a micromanager. Let everybody, sort of walk around and by osmosis figure it out. And that may not be right. So you need to assess the person on a per person basis and figure out, what do they need right here, right now, in this moment when I'm leading them. And no one's ever I don't think people tell people that, like, go figure it out one task at a time, or one person at a time, because you need to flex your style. A good leader knows how to flex, right? They aren't the same person every time.
But to do that, that somewhat supposes that the leader, when the style does require more engagement and micromanaging, that the leader is competent to do that. So it requires that you actually know what needs to be done, or vice versa, that you have the confidence and the awareness of your people to know when you can back up, when you can back off, because you don't want to just set someone up for failure and say, well, you know what, I'm going to let you learn through mistakes. Well, that's to a certain degree that's fine. And it's interesting that I hear more and more when I talk to younger employees, when I say, what do you want most in a leader? And there are lots of answers, but what comes up more frequently than I had expected is they will say, I want competence. I want someone who I feel I can count on, that he or she, they know the job, they know what needs to be done. And when they say, we're doing this for this reason, I need to be able to trust them. And I don't know that this is true, but I'm wondering if, when we made that sort of flip into the 70s and 80s, where we all avoid micromanaging, so that it's really not necessary, because you're not going to be a micromanager, so you don't necessarily know which buttons need to be pushed. You don't necessarily need to know all of the details, but in fact, maybe the pendulum is swinging back to where you actually, when it's necessary, have to know enough to be an effective detail manager, or vice versa. How does that strike you?
Well, I think we should back up the train, and you and I should brainstorm a list. How do people learn to do things? In the workplace, how do employees gain skills? What are all the different ways?
It depends.
You got an A on the midterm, Dan Rust. What are the types of ways people can learn at work?
Well, I suppose they learn by observing, they learn by doing, sometimes they learn by making mistakes.
Right.
Um,
Who might they observe?
each other.
Mhm.
Sometimes their supervisor or their manager.
Yeah.
Um, I guess
What
those would
else
be
might
my
they
answers.
observe?
Oh no, I feel like what else might they observe?
How do people learn stuff at work? Right? They can go to a training. They can, my favorite way. They can watch a YouTube video, which a lot of them do. They can observe a coworker, right? They can be cross trained. Their manager can tell them.
Mhm.
They can say, go to the shared site and read the manual, right? There are all kinds of ways that people can learn. Some of those ways don't necessarily include the manager exactly knowing how to do the thing, right?
Mhm.
Some of those things are other people who know and are experts and have figured out a way to share that knowledge. Some of it's transferable skill sets, right? So a good leader will know their people and will say, "Oh, well, you kind of already did this. Let's talk
Mhm.
about the things you've already done in your history or on your resume or here in our workplace that you've done that are really already this, right?" So I do think, yeah, a manager has to know the business and they have to know why what they're asking the person to do is important and valuable for the company and for the person, like all of that, yeah. But they don't have to have that same level of knowledge that they're asking the employee to gain because there are so many places that
Sure.
an employee can gain the knowledge to do their job without the leader technically taking up their time to
But
to
but
teach them.
then the leader also needs to know what they don't know so that you
Sure.
don't have
Oh
a
yeah.
leader
Yeah.
getting overly directive in an area where they actually don't have the expertise to be directive.
Right, and then they give bad data. Then the
Mhm.
person has to unlearn, right, what the leader taught them, and that's where you'll see the coworkers take the person aside and say, "No, we don't actually do it that way," right? And so that's a complete disconnect for the employee. And so back to your question of why do these newer entrants into the workforce want competence? Maybe they're seeing a lack of it when the leaders are showing them how to
Yeah.
do things, when they're new to the company.
Particularly if they're thinking, I would do it differently and I could do it better. Um, and yet you're only in the leader, you're only in your 30s, so I can't wait for you to die off and move somewhere else.
Right,
How do I
right.
fill this vacuum, essentially?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's another piece you just said is,
yeah.
when a new entrant, I'm not going to say young people because, I can't talk about age because I have an HR background. So I'm going to say when a newer entrant into the workforce comes on, leaders need to be confident that they can have an exchange, a
Mhm.
conversation. And if the person truly has a better way to do something, then that should be explored. What often happens, as the parent of two young adults, is the young adult or the newer entrant thinks they have a better way, but
Mhm.
they're missing a couple pieces of life experience that might not make their way better from a legal standpoint or any
Mhm.
range of things that should be considered when you're doing things at work. And so, that's where the leader needs to make the decision. Should I allow trial and error to happen with support?
Mhm.
Or should I be more directive in this case? And again, it's about trying to know your people, trying to understand their style, their history, and what can they draw upon to also get to this
Mhm.
conclusion.
And then sometimes those new entrants into the workforce, you see, I do learn those new entrants into the workforce. Sometimes they do have better ideas, or they have ideas that wouldn't have occurred to you. And so, maintaining that openness, I think, can be critical, or at least making sure that they feel they have a voice, so that they feel they've been heard. And even if if they've been heard, and then it's explained to them, or they come to understand that, okay, with a different perspective or with more information, maybe that idea wasn't as great as I thought it was. This does lead me, because you mentioned your background in HR, and it's not often Because now you have a background in HR, you've been an HR director, you've been a key leader in human resources, but now you're out, not like you're out of the mafia, but you're out. And
Well, it's a little bit like that.
is
Yeah.
it? Do they pull you back in? Do they
People
um,
do ask me to come back to being in the HR world. Yes.
so with that, uh, I know you for a while you participated in a group called the Wine and Dine Networking HR group, and that and actually they have wine and dine groups in multiple states, and you participated for a while. And as I understand it, it's just a place where HR professionals can get together for dinner and discuss the real, like what's really happening in a safe environment under the cone of silence. And I'm not asking you to break your HR code, but
Yeah.
what's it like when HR folks get together for a nice dinner and a couple glasses of wine, and they start to talk about their worlds? What is that like?
So the Wine and Dine organization is just a great place for that. It's spelled wine, WHINE, and dine, although there are fermented beverages involved if you desire. So the whole concept of wine and dine is that we really can't talk to other people in the company about things that are sort of our biggest pet peeves or struggles that we're having necessarily. And so it is nice to have a network of people outside of your organization, but who still understand the environment of an HR person. And so for me, it was a wonderful organization because some of the ground rules are no selling. We don't come there to be like, I want to be your recruiter, or I want to be your comp professional. We come there just to network. The second, it's not a ground rule, but it's it's sort of an overriding principle, is that networking is not just for not working. That's a quote from one of the original founders of Wine and Dine. And so it's not just a room full of unemployed people who are trying to see if they can get a job from a whole bunch of other unemployed people. So it's really a mixture, some people that are job seeking, but also, HR folks that are in roles. So that's where the best part of the conversation occurs, because people are talking openly, they're sharing best practices, they're benchmarking, they're networking, which is really absolutely critical to success in the working world. So,
Well, and I
and
imagine,
folks will connect after as well. They'll get
yeah.
together and they'll have a cup of coffee, and they'll continue the conversation one-on-one that was started in a group setting. So it's really a great any kind of networking you can do that helps you to connect to others in your industry or in your vocation. Highly, highly recommended.
So in your experience, let's look at your entire life of experience. Is there one event or thing that's happened to you that you would say that is like one of the major formative experiences of my life that led me to be the person that I am today, the leader that I am today, the just the human that I am today? What would you say is the or one of the most formative experiences of your life?
I mean, no, I wouldn't say there is an experience. I would say, for me, it's been the self-realization of different experiences. For me, for example, when I went to school, I was fortunate. I was able to go to college. I majored in soc anthropology. It was a school that was very much into internships and co-ops and other. It was Drexel University. I don't have to be, I don't have to hide it. Go Dragons. And so I spent 5 years there, because you do that to get all the extra work experience, to get a 4-year degree. And near the end, I was like, oh, I don't want to be a psychologist, because then you have to get your doctorate. And I really didn't want to do that. So at the end, I had a good career advisor, and I just took a bunch of classes, like in the last year and a half. All these classes, I took classes in accounting and finance and law, and this class called personnel management. Can you imagine, Dan? And so I realized through all those classes that, wow, HR is absolutely where I want to be. And I was lucky that I found that
Hmm.
um, before I graduated. And then super lucky that I was able to get into a program with an assistantship. So I had, so extra funds for the tuition in human resources. And that was a master's program at Rutgers. And those were big for me because so school, education,
Yeah.
school is huge, because when I got to Rutgers, I was like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. I love these courses. I love what I'm learning. Rutgers was very practical, very hands-on. Like, you learn the thing and then you build the model like in the next week, so it was just, for me, that was great. So that was hugely formative. I knew I was in the right place. And then it's really just been for me a journey of having this manager or that organization and saying I like this or I don't like that, and some of it's fortuitous, and so met somebody on an internship and then fell in love with him, and that became my husband. But that I didn't plan it, but that was a big
Hmm.
thing, right? And that influenced jobs that I took. I took a job in Houston and he was in New Jersey, and then, said, well, I'm not loving the distance. I'm not loving the whatever. And then came back. So all that, that's just stuff, right? That happens where you land, where you move to, what train line you're on, all of that, I think, adds up to, where you're going to apply for work and the experiences you're going to have. So no one thing, many things, but trying to process them as, how is this, what's good about this, what would I do differently about this.
Well, and then exposing yourself to those many things, that whether that was intentional or not, that was ultimately the outcome. But it's interesting that you've arrived at this place where psychology, sociology, or soc, as you refer to it. I'm assuming that's how the cool kids refer to sociology,
Yeah,
psychology, soc, and anthropology.
yeah,
I mean, you've arrived at this, what I would think is the most exciting arena in the modern world for psychology, sociology, and anthropology would be the modern work environment. I mean,
right,
that's where we exist, and that's where humans are interacting with each other, and where all the complexities of humans ultimately bubble up. And then in the HR role, you get to manage all of that complexity, or at least attempt to manage through a lot of that. Um, in terms of, because I know you focus a lot on emerging leaders and helping emerging leaders grow into their roles and accelerate their career trajectories. Is there any common advice or any common gaps that you see with emerging leaders where you're able to, well, again, accelerate them through your interaction with them?
they're my favorite. Don't tell the others. Emerging leaders are my favorite, for this simple reason, and we've probably talked about this before, Dan, that they they've been sort of promoted or placed in this role, um, generally for technical skill,
Hmm.
possibility of the Peter principle, right? Where you're risen to this level because you have this great technical skill, but that's it, right? You're not going to go further. And they're steeped in the imposter phenomenon of like, how did I even get picked? Many of them. And what happens, I think, in our education system, college or high school or trade school, wherever you got your core education prior to coming into work, is we don't really teach some of the very basics of managing and leading. Things like how to delegate, right? Or how to coach another person and meet them where they are. And not coaching in terms of running up and down the sidelines yelling, throw the ball, red-faced coaching, but rather how to get someone to sort of maybe come to their own conclusions about where they are, what's going well, what's not going well, and what are the things they need to do to get to that next level, right? And so I see almost none of that, or I've seen almost none of that taught in class. And so here is this emerging leader. They're newly supervising or managing others, and they're like, I don't know how I'm supposed to do this, right? Those things. I know how to do the technical stuff. So I'll lean in real hard on the technical stuff because that's what got me here, and that's what I'm good at. So I see people who are really they don't know how to do the management stuff, and in some cases they're scared to death to ask because they're
Yeah.
afraid it would invalidate the selection of them as the supervisor manager. And that's why I love them, because when they come to class, they sit forward in their chairs. They are eye contact, listening, doing the activities, because they really want to get it.
When I think back to my mid-20s and how I was as a leader, it takes my breath away in terms of how awful I was, because I came out of a 6-year stint in the Navy, so I had a very militaristic idea of what leadership is. I had experienced a certain kind of leadership, and then to transition very quickly into the corporate environment and leading others in the corporate environment, I realize now how bad that was. And in particular, I think there was this assumption that, okay, I was put in this role because I know what I'm doing, and I must be doing things right. So you should do things my way. I have my model of the way things are, the way I am. So I'm going to create clones of me. And it's a little cringy when I think back to some specific engagements or exercises that we went through.
What was it like? What was the Navy leadership model that did you bring the Navy leadership model with you, and what was it that you brought?
I wasn't so aware that I would never even refer to the Navy leadership model. I think it was just embedded. What I was used to was following orders and appreciating rank, and just doing the job that was laid out in front of me. Now I was somewhat lucky because I was in the nuclear Navy, so I was a nuclear reactor operator. So I went through their nuclear education program, and it is different than the rest of the military, because they're grabbing onto you because they do want you to think. They don't want you just to push the red button because something says push the red button. They want you to understand all of the implications of everything that you're doing, because there's an entire nuclear system behind everything that you touch. So there's an expectation that you will think as well as do, but it's still very directive. And there was, when I transitioned out, there was no career guidance, no career coaching. It was truly, okay, thanks for 6 years, see ya. And it was, and then out into the the big wide world. Luckily, I was based in San Diego, so even though I flailed for a while, I flailed in San Diego, California. So how bad can it be if on a bad day you go out to the beach and sit for a while? So this may not be like HR appropriate, but I'm going to ask anyway. When you think back to leaders you've experienced, have you experienced any what I might call "don't lead like this" examples? You don't have to mention names or details, but sometimes you ask, how do we learn?
Numbers, right.
I know for me, I learned from the examples of others, and sometimes I learn more from the examples of others doing things not right versus doing things perfectly. But any examples of whether emerging leaders struggling or even senior leaders struggling, anything that you think might be illuminating for us?
It's funny. I can't say I've had a really bad supervisor manager. I've had some great supervisor managers, and I've had some supervisor managers who were great at some things and not good at some things. I've not had anyone that I can recall that was so direct. Now I could say, up the chain, I mean, there's all kinds of,
Sure.
whatever. But I could say from a direct standpoint, my leaders have been really good. I'm lucky in that regard. I know people have had some real, humdingers out there. But I can't point to any scars, I can say that for the leaders that were good, but then there were times when they weren't good, I think it was maybe because there was some inconsistency, right? And leaders talk about this a lot. Like when we do facilitation, they'll say, you need to be consistent. They'll say that about themselves. You need to be consistent. You need to be, people need to be able to rely on you. And so the best leaders I've had, my favorite leaders, were the ones who would call me into the office and say, okay, here's the real story. Like, here's what's going on behind the scenes, or here's what you don't know about that person.
Yeah.
And here's why I had to have that conversation, or I talked to them in this way, or I didn't talk to them in this way. Here's what you don't know about them. Or here's the political backstory inside the organization, or here's my logic, here's my thinking, here's why I do the things I do or I don't do. And I've had lots of leaders who let me in on their thinking, or I would ask them a question and they would give me a straight answer. Those were the best. And times when I was like frustrated with a leader, it was because one day they said, oh, I really want you to do it. I want you to do it this way. And I would, a week later, I'd give them the thing that way, and they'd say, "Oh no," and they'd mark it all up, and I'd say, "Wait, that's not consistent with what you wanted last week." And so, and that's not a big deal, right? Because you ultimately are going to come to figure out what is going on, right? Why is it not consistent? But I've been lucky in that regard.
Well, now you say something really interesting. You said, now that it's not a big deal. And that whole mindset of, hey, I put in a lot of hours, or I put in some time, I did what I thought was asked, and now it turns out that it's not at all what you had in your mind. A person can tell themselves two different stories about that, and one story can make it a big deal. And it is, oh, this is a huge deal. I've wasted my time. I've wasted my energy. Yada yada yada. And it means, and then this one thing means everything. It means they're not competent. It means they're not attentive. It means I can't trust what they're saying. All kinds of stories can be told. Or the story can be, okay, that's a miss, not a big deal. I'm going to learn a little more about communicating with them from this, and we're going to move on to the next thing. And it doesn't really matter which story is more accurate. What really matters is which story gets you to the more optimal outcome, and that whole, it's not such a big deal, I think, is that's a valuable lesson to take away. Now, sometimes things are big deals, but every deal doesn't have to be a big deal.
Well, and I think the way I presented it was completely and thoroughly disingenuous, because at the time I was frustrated and like, what, why can't you tell me what you want, right? Was like, and maybe not even to their face, right? Maybe behind the back with the other coworkers. So I can't say I got there immediately. I can say, in retrospect, that's not such a bad thing. But yeah, in the moment, for sure, I was not like, oh, it's no big thing, I'll just redo this whole thing, because I want it to be exactly how you want it, right? And I don't care that you want control over the thing and you're changing stuff, maybe in my mind, completely arbitrarily because you didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, it's behind it, and it's one facet of a leader that was a great leader to me. So
I had a mentor, not immediately following my stint in the Navy, but about 4 years later. And he was, God bless him, he's passed on now, but he was a great guide. And I remember one day he sat down with me and he said, nobody intentionally wants to be a bad leader. Nobody intentionally wants to do a bad job. He said, now, there are bad leaders. There are people who do bad jobs. There are people who make mistakes. But just always remind yourself, it's almost never intentional. Rare occasion it might be, but almost never. Right, and so then you have to ask yourself, then why are they doing a bad job? They don't want to, so there must be some reason behind it. And that stuck with me. I can't say I always remember it in the heat of the moment, but it sticks with me to say, okay, there's always a reason under the reason, an issue under the issue. And a lot of times when you do take the time if you can, to find out those underlying reasons, it can help, or what it can do is also help you, even if you don't ultimately discover what the underlying reason is, it at least can give you a sense of perspective. Maybe it's not such a big deal. Or if there's another side to the story, even if I don't know what that side is, at least helps me manage my own emotions.
I hope you show that same level of self awareness and impulse control when I ask you to edit the training materials that you've provided to me 2 weeks or 5 days before the actual training session.
So in the past, have I shown that same impulse control? I hope that I have.
You
I hope
have.
that I have. And
I just want you to keep that last thought in mind.
yeah, I
You
will.
don't always know the underlying craziness, reason. You just know that the person is insistent.
Absolutely fair request. And what I know happens with me is the reason the lesson is so good for me is because I do get a little too fiery and judgmental and cynical sometimes, and when I can remind myself to back up, there's another side to the story. I may not always know what that other side is, but there always is. Because what I appreciate most about you, Joyce, is you just the phrase "flow like water" or "be water." You seem to be somebody who's really internalized just flow like water. Whatever happens, happens. You do what you can to put ripples in the current, but you're not going to try to change the unchangeable. You seem to. Has that always been your nature, or is this something you've arrived at over time?
I'm sure if you interviewed any 10 people, they'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like she flows like lava, or she flows like a rock. But I will say that I grew up in a household, the youngest of 8. And so, yeah, I mean, I kind of didn't have control over anything, right?
Mhm.
So I definitely can say when you see that behavior, it's definitely because I knew I wasn't going to change where things were going or how they were going to get there. So I was definitely going to ride that current. But there are definitely times when I don't flow at all. I'm completely intractable, or get me at
Mhm.
Thanksgiving. Let's start talking politics at Thanksgiving. I'll be standing on my chair, pointing my finger at you, saying things you could never imagine me saying. And that's actually a true story. And we'll talk about that another time. But I guess definitely part of, your upbringing definitely has an impact on at least how you show up in the workplace, right? If
Yeah.
not other places as well.
So since emerging leaders are a true passion for you, let's go back to that for a bit. With emerging leaders coming into a work environment, have you had situations where leaders go or young
Come on,
where
Dan.
I'm trying to remember the right terminology.
Newer entrants
Okay,
into the workforce.
okay. Have you had a situation where newer entrants into the workforce
Right, right.
may work as a colleague for a group of people, and then at a certain point, because they're such a strong individual contributor, they are promoted into a supervisory role over their colleagues? When that happens, I guess any guidance you might provide in a situation like that?
Yeah. That is a really hard one. That comes up all the time when we're facilitating. It's a struggle for them, and sort of the whole. And I'm probably oversimplifying when I say I kind of want to be their friend, and I almost don't even know, how to now be, manage. That's oversimplification because they know a lot of it, but I think the anxiety over breaking the eggshells is big. And back to being consistent, right? You can certainly be kind and friendly to someone, whether you're a peer or a manager, but you can also distance a little. There could be an appropriate
Yeah.
distance for people that report to you. I'm not saying you shouldn't socialize or those kinds of things, but you're probably not going to get in the weeds with the complaining about the company or the management or this, that, and the next thing, right? You're going to find yourself in a different place because when you get promoted to that level, you're an agent of the company.
Mhm.
And so a lot of people don't understand the concept of what does it mean to be an agent of the company, or I didn't pick being an agent of the company. But the reality is when you assume the awesome mantle of management and leadership, you are. And so in some ways that has to change. Your behavior has to change enough so that you can put forth the objectives of the company, but also protect the assets of the company. That's a very, I don't know, that's a concept that people do not tell new leaders about, that
Mhm.
you're in a different place. You're responsible. You're accountable for the things that happen in the department, even if you're not there when they happen. So that level of accountability means you need to behave in a way that is protective of yourself and the organization. It's a tough concept for newer leaders.
Well, and going back to psychology, sociology, and anthropology, it's an interesting transition when you have someone who has been a member of the tribe
Hmm. Hmm.
and an equal contributor to the tribe, perhaps maybe an exceptional contributor because something about them caused, but the tribe did not vote to make them
Right.
chief or leader.
Right.
Someone,
Or medicine person,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
any of those layers of power.
Suddenly they're elevated to providing direction, and so from an anthropological standpoint or a psychological standpoint, that's challenging for people because I didn't choose you to lead, and now I'm going to be watching how does your behavior change, how do you change, what's and that can be very challenging, I imagine, for newer leaders, younger leaders who are trying to manage all of those dynamics. Because I had some people who I was really good friends with. I had some people who I was not good friends with. In fact, I kind of had a chip on my shoulder about them, and all of those things
Right.
have to kind of be set aside to some
Right.
degree to say I'm not going to pretend that I don't know all of those things, but I now have to give everyone a fair shot in terms of how I lead them because as you point out, my prime responsibility is to safeguard the assets of the business. And in this case, one of those assets is the time and capability of the people who are reporting to me.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think, and there's worse things that can happen. It could be someone else wanted the role and didn't get it, and now that creates a whole different dynamic that it either is one that would want to see you not succeed, or one that isn't going to be real helpful to you, whatever. And so there's a lot of sociology
Mhm.
happening in that environment, and of course there's no sure one way to get different personalities or different team members on board, but you got to try to get them all on board. And some of them will come on board because they ride the flow, right? They're like,
Yeah.
whatever. Oh, you're the new boss, great. Sign here. Like they don't, whatever. It's not a thing to them. Some people, you'll need to elevate them with you. Look, I may have gotten the job, but you're still the subject matter expert in X, and so we really need you for that. So you kind of may need to elevate other people to be to get on the bus, right? And there's a lot of different ways people get on the bus, and your job as a leader is to figure it out. What's the motivation for these people? And there's other things too, right? Sometimes we give up easily, and there's turnover, and
Mhm.
for whatever reason, whether it's something voluntary, involuntary, or mutual agreement. But there are lots of changes that can happen in terms of the people on the team. But wouldn't it be great if you had a great team, if you could continue to have the same great team, even though somebody was elevated who wasn't elected? So there's a lot of communication, observation, listening, even some strategy, right? Because you're a leader now, and leaders need to be more strategic. All of that has to play into the success of you But ultimately, it's not you, it's the success of the team, which gets noticed by who? People above. And that translates into success for the company. Sounds
You
easy,
know,
right?
I have been the guy passed over. I have been the person who was absolutely certain they were the best fit for
Yeah.
the promotion, and in the end, I had to have the hard conversation with my boss, who said, "It's not going to be you.
Yeah.
Um, we're going to go outside. We're going to go." So after going through all of the interviews, doing all of the formal processing, what I was so sure of was that I looked at everyone else on the existing team, everyone else internally who could be a candidate, um, and I just knew I was the best fit, and so I had internalized the promotion. I was,
You were.
and then for my boss to say, we're going to go in a different direction. I didn't handle it well at first. I didn't remember any of the guidance I'd received. In fact, I think I remember saying, "Oh, okay." So when they say you're, how did I say it? Oh, when they say you're better than nothing, I guess that's not true, because you've decided to go out. You've decided, even though I might be the best here, I'm not good enough, and you're going outside. And I did not handle it well. On the flip side, though, they wanted to keep me, and they saw potential in me, and they saw how frustrated I was, and so they did an interesting thing. They actually said, we're gonna give you an opportunity for some leadership coaching, and we're not going to choose the leadership coach for you. We're just going to give you a budget. I had never had this happen before,
Yeah.
where an employer said, "Here's the budget. Spend it however you want. It's got to be on leadership coaching, so don't go to Las Vegas, but
New car.
you can submit the receipts, or you can submit the invoice to us. We'll pay for it." And the budget was good. This was 20 years ago, and it was I think an $8,000 budget. It was
Yeah, that's money for
I
coaching.
got 6 months of coaching,
Yeah.
and I identified someone who was really good, and I just, that to me, that was a life-changing experience, and it wouldn't have happened if I had been selected for the role. It
Right.
absolutely now it turns out the guy they did hire, he no,
He
he
was
was
not
not.
a fit,
No,
not a
he was not.
fit,
But by
cultural.
the time, oh, he was so not a fit. However, not that I'm holding a grudge, but it turns out he was not a fit. But then after all of the coaching that I received, I moved on within the organization and moved on to other things. And in the end, what felt like the worst of all outcomes actually turned out to be a true, like I said, career altering event that changed the trajectory of my career. So you do never know. You just don't know what things might come when things don't go well. I think that a lot of emerging leaders are probably put in that leadership position because they've been so good for so long.
Yeah.
Things work out. If I work hard enough, if I do enough, things work out. I will muscle my way through. But there does come a point where stuff happens, where unpredictable stuff happens, and how you handle those unpredictable moments, those less than fantastic events in your life,
Right.
they can either derail your career for years, or they can accelerate you onto the next thing. Maybe not always. I mean, there's no guarantee, but a lot of that happens in your head. Like, you decide what this means, and that's probably one of the things I see in mature leaders who have been through a lot of rocky times. They've developed that capability, and I think if I could reach back to my past self, that's the gift I would give myself, is that ability to think about the story I'm telling myself, and maybe tell a different story
Right.
that might just turn what was a car wreck into a little speed bump, and
Yeah.
then move on to the next, and move on to the next. Um, if you had a group of emerging leaders with you right now, and you think about all of the various emerging leader training sessions that you've done,
Mhm.
coaching that you've done, counseling that you've done, if you had just a minute or two with a small group or an individual emerging leader, I know this isn't fair, but are there any thoughts that would crystallize like what you feel would be most important to impart into a young emerging leader?
Yeah, in a way, you covered it, Dan, which is to say, what you think is a catastrophe right now, it, 10 years from now, you probably won't even remember it. This is why I can't remember terrible managers or these, big moments that, were earth
Mhm.
shattering and changed everything about me, because it doesn't pass the 10-year test, right? The 10-year test is, in 10 years, am I going to be married to it? Am I going, is it going to be a judge in the county where I work, or live? Is it, what is this? Is it going to be a parent of mine? Is it going to be one of my children or a close relative? If the thing isn't any of those, it's probably not nearly as big as you think it is.
Mhm.
So I feel like that's a really important point. Is we can overthink and over negativize things that happen in our career, and really they may not be nearly as horrible as you think they are. And I love that you had a career coach. You can just have a rant buddy. You can have a friend outside of the organization, does not work for your organization, who can help you just to realize, hey, yeah, that happened. That felt really bad, and that was a bad moment for you. In time, you're going to see that was a speed bump, and so I do think that is super valuable. And even even the great things, right? Remember when we all came out of school and we put our GPAs on our resume?
Mhm.
You remember that? We were like, oh yeah,
It's
my GPA.
embarrassing, but yes, yes.
Right, because I was proud.
Mhm.
I did a lot of studying or whatever,
Mhm.
took tests and all that. So I was proud of that. Well, after a year or so, GPA falls off the resume, right? Because it's really not important. It's not relevant. And so I think it's the same. It's the same with the good things. You should feel great about them, and you should love them, but you can't rest on those per se. You're going to have to continue to accumulate, these wins in your win column, and it's okay to shed off the losses, because they're, you learn from them, right? You take them, you learn from them, but over time, they're not going to necessarily be nearly as big as you think, as you feel like they are in the moment. So I think that's a good lesson for people.
And the version of that lesson when it comes to leading others, uh, I think would be, as you lead a team of others, whether it's a team of 8 or 8,000, when they do great things,
Yeah,
they do great things.
right,
Um, and those things are great, but they're probably not, they're not as fantastically great as they may feel in the moment, but it's definitely them doing great things.
right,
And then when things don't work out, what I see in the very best leaders is they don't unfairly put it all on their own shoulders, but they do put it on their shoulders. It is more
right,
of they do great things, and when we have a miss, I own the miss. Now
yeah,
that's not to say I'm going to let other people off the hook when they've contributed to the miss, but I'm going to own the miss because that's part of the job, and it may not seem fair, and it probably isn't fair, but it is what makes a great leader: a willingness to own the miss, and give away the credit,
yeah,
within reason. You don't want someone who is so self-effacing
right,
that
right, right.
that they're just a toady. That's not what we're talking about. But um, so any other final thoughts as we wrap up? I would just want to say, Joyce, what I love about this
Oh,
is just kind of the real world dialogue, particularly when it comes to emerging leaders. I think that many of them feel like they're in this alone. They feel
yes,
like I'm trying to figure this out on my own, and they oftentimes don't get coaching. We put you in this job because you are a great individual contributor, and how hard can it be? You're going to have 7 people reporting to you. Come on.
easy,
Yeah, easy peasy. But suddenly now you've got 7 people who need things from you. You've got 7
right,
people who have opinions about what you're doing. You have 7 people who take your time. because you've got to
Right.
give each of them some time. And
Yes.
in the 7 people, you've got a few that are doing great, and you're going to have a few that maybe aren't doing so great. You're going to have to figure that whole thing out, and to suddenly go into that kind of role, it's both technically challenging, but back to sociology, it's also psychologically challenging, because if you haven't internalized yourself as the leader yet, that can be a very stressful place where you're trying to figure out, how do I manage all of that?
Yeah.
Any final thoughts for emerging leaders that you would want to share?
I think, yeah, like you said, get some training, read up a little, try to understand styles, there's a million different models, of strength finders and DISC and, insights. And I don't make a commission selling any of those, but pick any model of people, different communication styles or leadership styles. Read up on the highlighted points. You don't have to be, it doesn't have to be a 20-year research study, but just try to learn the people that report to you. Try to learn sort of what does make them different. What is different about their style, so that you can meet them where they are. That's a huge point. You have your own style. Most humans have sort of a go-to style or a couple of styles that they sort of fall back on. But also, most humans are able to flex their style. Actually, pretty much all humans are able to flex their style. So styles is a big thing. Look, figure out who you're dealing with. As a leader, it's incumbent upon you not to impose your style on others, but to meet them where they are. Think back to the best managers you ever had. They were people who got you, right? They were people who were able to provide what you needed in the time, in the moment when you needed it. And so that's my last piece of advice, is pick any model of style, study up on it, start to apply styles to those that report to you, so that you can meet them where they are.
That's fantastic. And YouTube is a great resource. If you just go to YouTube and you type in personality styles or leadership styles or any kind of workplace styles, you'll get exposure to a lot of different models, and it'll begin a process of education that'll probably last your entire life as you gain more and more knowledge. So Joyce, number one, I really appreciate this. I appreciate you just sharing your thoughts, your experience, your expertise. It doesn't go unnoticed that you're willing to give an hour of your time, and you're somebody whose time is very precious and valuable. So I do appreciate that. Hopefully we'll do this again sometime, but for now, thank you so much. And
I want to say one thing on
Sure.
behalf of everyone. I think you are better than nothing. So I want to leave it there.
Yes, I will. I'm going to go add that to my LinkedIn profile.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
All
Have
right.
a good day.
Thank you. So long, everyone.